Okay, now we're going to look at how this process of creating a perfect square trinomial relates to circles. Um, when we when we use the term completing the square, what that means is what we were doing at the end of the last video, taking something that's not a perfect square trinomial and making a perfect square trinomial. So let's do a little review of the equation of a circle. Here's the equation of a circle. What is the center of this circle? Well, you take the opposite of that number, which is 4, and you take the opposite of that number, which is -2. So the center of this circle is 4, -2. Then you take the square root of that, and that's your radius. So the radius of the circle is 5. Now, if you notice in here, that looks like the factorization of a perfect square trinomial. It's that binomial squared. And if you look here, you see another one. That's also the factorization of a perfect square trinomial. It's a binomial squared. Anytime you have a binomial squared, when you FOIL this out, it's a trinomial. So we're going to look at an equation of a circle in a little bit different form. Okay, this is a circle, and I recognize that it's a circle because I have a 1x squared and a 1y squared. Okay, I recognize this as being an equation of a circle. However, when it's in this form, sorry, I cannot pull out the center and the radius. When your circle is in this form up here, it's very easy to identify your center by taking the opposite of that number and the opposite of that number and square rooting that to get your radius. So what we have to do is we have to take this equation and we have to put it in that form. Once this equation is in that form, I'll be able to identify my center and my radius. And how do we do this? Okay, well, it uses the process of completing the square. Okay, so this is our familiar form of a circle. This is what's called the standard form of a circle. So how do we take this equation and get it into this form? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to move the constant to the right side of the equation. So this is the constant, the 4. So I'm going to rewrite this equation to be x squared plus y squared plus 4x plus 8y, and I'm going to subtract the 4 from both sides. So I'm going to subtract 4 from there, so it's gone, and I'm going to subtract 4 from there and get -4. Then I'm going to group the x's together in parentheses. So I'm going to rearrange this side. I'm going to do x squared plus 4x, and then I'm going to do y squared plus 8y equals -4. So all I did was group the x's together, the x squared with the 4x in parentheses, and everything's positive here, so the parentheses aren't going to make a difference. And then I'm going to group the y squared with the 8y. Okay, I'm getting close to that form. I'm not there. This is not that form. Notice here the squared is on the outside, and here my squared is on the x. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do the process of completing the square here. We're going to create a perfect square trinomial here. We're going to create a perfect square trinomial here. So let's do this side first. And eventually you'll be able to do this a little faster. I'm going to do x squared plus 4x plus blank, just like we were doing in the end of the previous video. We'll leave the y's for a minute. Okay, so now what number do I have to add here to complete the square? Well, if you remember, you have to take half the middle number. So what's half of 4? You take half of 4, which is 2, and then you square the 2, which is 4. So I need to add a 4 here. But, and here's the part that a lot of people forget. Remember in algebra, whatever, guess I need a space there, whatever you do to one side of an equation, you must do to the other side to maintain balance. I can't randomly add a 4 to one side of the equation. If I add a 4 here, I've got to add a 4 here. Okay, so what I have here now is I have x squared plus 4x plus 4. Okay, now I'm going to do that same process. I'm going to complete the square with the y's. So I'm going to leave a blank. And this now becomes a 0 over here, negative 4 plus 4. Okay, now I'm going to complete the square here. I'm going to create a perfect square trinomial. So I do that process. I take half of 8, which is 4, and then I square the 4, which is 16. So I have to add a 16 here. But remember, you can't randomly add a 16 to one side of the equation. Whatever you do to the one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. So I have to add a 16 here. Okay, so what does my equation look like now? I have x squared plus 4x plus, oops, I don't need a parenthesis there, plus 4, sorry that's so messy. And then I have plus y squared plus 8y plus 16 equals 16. Now what you do is you factor both of these. Using your patterning that you know, this is x plus 2 squared, because remember what goes there is half of that number. And this is y plus 4 squared equals 16. I'm going to write this below here because I really squished it. X squared plus 4x plus 4 factors in x plus 2 squared. Because remember, you need half of that middle number goes there. 8y squared plus 8y plus 16 factors into y plus 4 squared, because half of that 8 goes there and you have 16 there. Now do you see how this is in the familiar form? I'll scoot back up here of our circle here. So once it's in that form, I can identify the center. The center of this circle, you take half of that number is negative 2. You take half of that number, it's negative 4. And to get the radius, which I should put over here, you square root that, which is 4. So your radius is 4. See, so being up here like this, when we first introduced the equation way up here, I couldn't tell what the center and the radius was because it wasn't in that form. So we use this process of completing the square to get it in this familiar form. Then I can identify the center and the radius of the circle. Okay, so let's go through another one. We're going to go through it a little bit quickly because I want you to be able to do these things. It seems like it takes a really long time, but when you get used to doing them, they go quickly. So I'm going to meld a couple of steps here together. Remember, we had to group the x's. So I'm going to do x squared minus 8x in parentheses, and I'm actually going to leave a blank, plus blank. Then I'm going to group the y's. So I have y squared plus 12y, and I'm going to leave a blank because I'm going to do these at the same time. Up top, I did them in separate steps. It took a little while, but you were able to do this a lot quicker if you do things at the same time. So I grouped the x's and left a blank. I grouped the y's and left a blank. And remember, this constant has to subtract over to the other side. So I'm going to put a negative 3 over the other side. Now I'm going to complete the square. So I take half of that number, which is negative 4, square it, it's 16. So I'm going to add a 16 there, but I also have to add a 16 here. Now I'm going to take half of that number, which is 6. Square it is 36, but because I added a 36 here, whoops, I have to add a 36 over there. See how I can do this in just 2 steps. Now all I have to do is factor this side. This is x minus 4 squared, because remember, half of that number goes in the binomial. And this is y plus 6 squared, because remember, half of that number goes in the binomial. And then I have to add these up, so this is negative 3 plus 16 is 13, plus 36 is 49. Now it's in my form, and I can easily see for the center of my circle, I take take the opposite of that, which is 4. I take the opposite of that, which is negative 6. And for my radius, I take the square root of that, so it's 7. Okay. Now, sometimes our radii are very nice. It's very easy to take the square root of 49. We know that the square root of 49 is 7. But sometimes the radii get a little weird. Okay, but don't be afraid of that. Your process remains the same. So I'm going to go through this process again. These three problems, I'm going to go through the process fairly quickly to show you how to do it in less steps. So I'm going to group my x's together. So I'm going to have x squared plus 6x plus blank. I'm going to group my y's together. So I have y squared minus 10y plus blank. And now this time this is a negative 3, so I have to add a 3 to both sides. So I have to add 3 here, add 3 here, so I get equals 3. Now I'm going to complete the square. Okay, so I'm going to complete the square with the x's. Sorry, I just have to move my camera a little bit to get it all on the screen. So I'm going to complete the square with the x's. So I take half of that number. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So I put a 9 here, but because I added 9 here, I have to add 9 here. Half of negative 10 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is 25, but because I added a 25 there, I have to add a 25 to the other side. Now I factor. Factor this. Remember, what goes in the binomial is half of that, so plus 3 squared. This is y, whoops, not y squared, sorry, y minus 5. Half of negative 10 is negative 5 squared. Remember, whatever goes in the binomial is half of the middle term, half of the coefficient of the middle term. And then I add these numbers up. So 3 plus 9 is 12. 12 plus 25 is 37. Now I'm in my general form, or my my standard form. This is actually called general form here. This is called standard form. And now that it's in the standard form, I can identify the center of my circle. I take the opposite of that for my x coordinate, it's negative 3. I take the opposite of that for my y coordinate, it's 5. And the radius is the square root of that. And since you can't easily take the square root of 37, we're just going to leave it as the square root of 37. Now, if you were going to graph it, you would have to get the decimal approximation of that. So I'm going to put approximately, and I'm going to get out a calculator, and I'm going to do square root of 37. Because if you were to graph it, you need the approximation. It's about 6.1. Okay. Now last one is going to involve fractions, because as you see, I have odd numbers, and taking odd numbers, taking half of odd numbers always results in a fraction. Okay, so same process though, the process doesn't change. I'm going to group the x squared with the 3x and leave a blank. Plus, I'm going to group the y squared with the minus 10y and leave a blank. and I'm going to subtract the 1/4 over to the other side. Subtract 1/4 there, subtract 1/4 there. Okay, so as not to be fractophobic here, we learned how to do these with the odd numbers. What is half of 3? Well, it's 3/2. And then you square 3/2 and it's 9/4. So I have to add 9/4 here. But remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So I need to add 9/4 there. Okay, complete the square here. What's half of -10? Half of -10 is -5. -5 squared is 25. So I also have to add 25 there. Whoops, I'm off the screen. I also have to add 25 there. Now I'll do my factoring. So this, remember what number goes in here is half of the middle number. It's the 3/2 squared. This factors into y, and what goes in here is half of the middle number, y minus 5 squared. And now I add these. So -1/4 plus 9/4 is 8/4, which is 2. 8/4 is 2, plus 25 is 27. Now it's in my standard form of my circle. So the center is opposite of that, -3/2. Opposite of that, 5. And my radius is the square root of that, which is the square root of 27, which if I get out a calculator, that is approximately, oops, not square root of 25. I don't know why I wrote that. Square root of 27. And then I get out my calculator and I do square root, get it out of the glare if I can, square root of 27 about 5.2. So my radius is approximately 5.2. So I think if you refer back to the video and do a couple of these, you'll start to get faster at them. Okay, good luck.